Greetings, 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 greetings. It is I, King Clifford Jefferson, a citizen of Godfrey, the fifth Caliban Jew, the son of Folk, the ruler of Jerusalem, the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, which we know here at the Third Temple English Church of England as Jesus Christ. It is August 20th, 2024, which is equivalent to the Berber year 2974. I greet you in the name of my Queen, Sister Galveston, from the House of Galveston. I greet you in the name of my Archbishop Belmont from the House of Belmont. I greet you in the name of the predecessors, the ancestors, the successors, the heirs, the kindred, family, brother, sister, mother, father, sons and daughters, and all the above. I'm here with another marvelous lecture for you all. And the name of the lecture is Why the Constitution Was Written Down and the story you were never told. Why the Constitution was written down, the story that you were never told. All right, so this is going to be a beautiful lecture. I'm going to go point for point with give you a timeline, a present timeline going back into time immemorial. There's no one on any other platform or any other church or any other government or any society or any group, public or private, can ever fathom. All right. It is a shame that right now you can go to Wikipedia, YouTube, Facebook, and look at the content of the of that which is being displayed on those particular platform. And in my eyes, over here, and what they permanently call the Anglosphere, the people are dead, unconscious, or out of their minds, based upon the basic understanding of law, government, politics, the basic understanding. All right. This is why people come together and create a constitution. All right. This is the purpose for a constitution. All right. Because we know the word constitution means makeup. All right. Speaking abstract, we're going to get a concrete definition in a second. but we know it means what constitutes something, what makes up something. Okay, what's its composition? All right, so that's what we're going to talk about. Why the Constitution was written down, and the story you were never told. All you brothers and sisters, get your pens and your papers, uh, as well as your notebooks, your flash drives, whatever you need to do to store this information because it's going to be pertinent upon your entry into the third temple English Church of England. Like I said, there's nothing out there in the world that can compare to what it is that you receive here. And I open the challenge to any platform, any religious society, any government to bring forth something that's fruitful in regards to what I claim to be barren. Because this land is barren with false information, and the seeds can't grow in a barren land. Okay, so you are the seeds of my father on the land from which the seed was planted, then you definitely must know your constitution. All right, so without further ado, I get started with this marvelous lecture. As always, uh, we give you a real time. This is what we call something that's happening in what we call real time. All right, an action that's taking place in real time for our people, on behalf of our people, for the people. Okay, very important. So, without further ado, we can start it with this marvelous lecture, public lecture. I won't hold you long, hopefully. Those that have free and common sockets, you can send them to the Third Temple English Church of England or to the $ Clifford Jefferson L. And it's well appreciated because, once again, as they say, what profits a man to gain the world but lose his soul? What would he give in exchange for his soul? Nothing. All right. So, without further ado, let's get started with this marvelous lesson. This lesson is about the Constitution. All right. The Constitution, why the Constitution was written down, and the story you were never told about why the Constitution was actually written down. Are they going to use narratives from professors of law? Okay. Professors of law, or those who become law professors by going into the history and the origin where the law derived. Whether the laws make a reference to any particular topic, is laws subject to what we call some type of law. All right. Something that keeps it within the confines of its composition. Okay. Something to keep it within the confines of its parameters. All right. We call that checks and balances. Okay. Checks and balances. Without no checks and balance, there can be no equality. All right. That's based upon your relationship in the social compact, which is established as the social contract. Okay. And which determines if you move from status to contract. Okay. So the social compact determines the social contract, which determines if you move from status to contract. Okay? If you don't understand those terms, please view my last lecture that I just did, and we'll make those terms very simple. Okay? So without further ado, let's get started. Let's get a basic understanding about our Constitution. Basic understanding about what is a Constitution before we go to our narrative. A constitution is the aggregate of the fundamental principles or established precedents that constitute the legal basis of a polity, organization, or other type of entity and commonly determines how that entity is to be governed. Do everybody understand that? So it applies to people, it applies to governments, and it applies to corporations. All right? Very important that you understand that basic definition that's given here on Wikipedia. What constitutes what you do it, how you do it, and why you do it. What constitutes that? Okay? We know in this modern day and time, we call that the Constitution or the written Constitution. We know prior to the written Constitution, the Constitution were not written down. They were common to the people. Okay? They were the common law of the people. Okay? Uncoded laws of the people. We call it the uncoded Magna Carta. Okay? The law of the Berbers. All right? For the government that was created through their uncoded laws, which was called Witten or the Wise Men. Okay? According to the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay? That's what they say. So it says when the principles are written down into a single document or a set of legal documents, those documents be said to embody a written constitution. I repeat, when these principles are written down into a single document or a set of legal documents, those documents may be said to embody a written constitution, whether it's talking for people, for a government, or for an organization, i.e. your corporation. When these principles are written down for itself, the Constitution of the United Kingdom is a notable example of an uncoded constitution versus a written constitution. It is instead written in numerous fundamental acts of legislature, court cases, and treaties. Did you hear that? So the Constitution contrast to the United States Constitution or your state's Constitution is an uncoded constitution that is exemplified by legislature, court cases, or either treaties. Everybody understand that. Constitution concerns different levels of the organization, from sovereign countries to companies and unincorporated associations. A treaty that establishes an international organization is also its constitution, and that it would define how the organization is constituted. Within states, a constitution defines the principles upon which the state is based, the procedure in which laws are made, and by whom. Some constitutions, especially codified constitutions, also act as limiters of state powers by establishing lines which a state ruler cannot cross, such as fundamental rights. Changes to the Constitution frequently require consensus or super majority. Okay? Very, very important. Any questions, please let me know in the chat. Etymology. The term constitution comes through the French from the Latin word constitutio, used for regulations and orders such as the imperial enactment, constitutionis principis, indicta, mandata, decreta, and rescripta. Later, the term was widely used in ecclesiastical law, such as the canon law, for an important determination, especially a decree issued by the Pope, now referred to as the apostolic constitution. Okay? William Blackstone used the term for a significant egregious violation of public trust of a nature and extent that the transgression would justify a revolutionary response. The term used by Blackstone was not for a legal text, nor did he intend to include the latter American concept of judicial review, but that were to set the judicial power above that of the legislature, which would be subversive of all government. Okay? Right here. In most, but not all modern states, the Constitution has supremacy over ordinary statutory law. See uncoded constitutions below. In such states, when an official act is unconstitutional, i.e., it is not a power granted to the government by the Constitution, that act is null and void, and a nullification of ab initio, that is from the inception, not from the date of the finding. It was never law, even though if it had been a statute or a statutory provision, it might have been adopted according to the procedures for adopting legislation. Sometimes the problem is not that a statute is unconstitutional, but that the application of it or a particular occasion in a court may decide that while there are ways it could be applied that are constitutional, that instance was not allowed or legitimate. In such cases, only that application may be ruled unconstitutional. Historically, the remedies for such violations have been petitioned for common law writs, such as a quo warranto. A quo warranto. We'll keep that term in mind. History and development. Since 1789, along with the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the oldest and shortest written constitution still in force, close to 800 constitutions have been adopted and subsequently amended around the world by independent states. Okay? You can see at the end of the eyes, these are your sources that you can reference. And you got different types of constitution going back to ancient. We don't go back that far because our time is considered ancient. We call it time immemorial, which we look to in the early Middle Ages. All right, because time immemorial refers to the time of Richard the First. All right, the son of Henry II, the son of Godfrey the Fifth Count of Anjou, the son of Folk, the ruler of Jerusalem, which we are descendants of. Right. Early Middle Ages, many of the Germanic people, once again, many of the Germanic people, we know when we talk about the Germanic people, we know that those are those subject to those who were their allegiance to Pope Gregory the First through the conversion of the Anglo-Saxon Berbers into Christianity. We know that the Franks, the Lombardi, as well as the Visigoths, were all descendants that originated from the Merovingian dynasty under Clovis the First that never claimed to be descendants of God. Okay? So many of the Germanic people, which we talked about in my last lesson, had their deities created through what we call the gods of evolution, meaning those of elements. All right, because we know that when we go to Asgard, Asgard deals with Arcadia, which is a form of virus bacteria that originated with the planet millions of years ago, known as the Prokaryo and the Archaeo. So these are the things that manifested through the state of evolution. And we know the state of evolution, in regards to any type of human, was the last thing that came about through evolution in regards to God's creation, and God is not a part of evolution. He is the one that created the process for evolution. We must understand that. So once again, many of the Germanic people that filled the power of vacuum left by the Western Roman Empire in the early Middle Ages codified their laws. One of the first of these Germanic law codes by the written was the Visigoths Code of Uruk 471 AD, that was followed by the Lex Burgundianum, applying separate codes for Germans and for Romans, the Patricus Almanarium, and the ascetic law of the Franks, all written soon after 500 AD. In 506, the Bavarian or Lex Romana of Alaric II, king of the Visigoths, adopted and consolidated the Codex Theodosianus together with assorted earlier Roman law. Sections that appeared somewhat later include the Edictum Rhetori of the Lombards and the Lex Viscotorium in 654 and the Lex Almanorium in 730 and the Lex Frisnium of 785. These continental codes were all composed in Latin, while Anglo-Saxon was used for those of England, beginning with the codes of Ethelbert of Kent in 602. Around 893, Alfred the Great combined these of Ethelbert and of Kent and two other early Saxon codes and various Mosaic and Christian precepts to produce what we call the Domesday Book or the Code of Law of England, which was considered the uncode law of the Anglo-Saxon Burgess Constitution, known as those of the kings of Wessex and going back to Gewes. All right? Very important for you to understand that. All right? So this is what we use. Other nations have their constitutions, such as the Constitution for the Arabs, the Constitution of Medina, also known as the Charter of Medina. So a constitution is, in fact, a charter. We must understand that term. A constitution is a charter. All right? It says the Middle Ages after 1000 AD, the provider Yaroslava originated combined by Yaroslav the Wise, the Grand Prince of Kiev, was granted to Grand Novgorod around 1017 and 1054 and was incorporated into the Rosaka Pravda and became the law for all of the Kievan Rus. It survived only in later editions in the 15th century. If we go to Middle Ages dealing with in England, it said in England, Henry I, which we know was the son of William the Conqueror, who invaded England, and he was the first English financier. Prior to that, the only kings ruling in that territory, then called England, was Anglo-Saxon Berbers, which is confirmed by the 1911 Encyclopedia. But it says here in England, Henry I's proclamation of the Charters of Liberty in 1100 bound the king for the first time in his treatment of the clergy and the nobility. This idea was extended and refined by the English barony when they forced King John to sign the written Magna Carta, contrast to the uncoded Magna Carta in 1215. The most important single article of the Magna Carta related to the habeas corpus, providing that the king was not permitted to imprison, outlaw, exile, or kill anyone at a whim. There must be due process of the law. This article, in Article 39, Article 39 of the Magna Carta, read: no free man should be arrested or imprisoned or deprived of his property or outlawed or exiled in any way destroyed, nor shall we go against him or sin against him unless by legal judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. All right? So this involves your relationship based upon the social contract and the social compact, which denotes to your or establish either you have a status or you're subject to what we call contract made by the government and based upon the laws created by that government, which we know if it's not the king government, it's the de facto government. So it says the provisions became the cornerstone of English liberty after that point. The social contract, i.e., social compact, and the original case was between the king and the nobility, but was gradually extended to all of the people, his subjects. If led to the system of constitutional monarchy, with further reform, shifting the balance of power from the monarchy and nobility to the House of Commons. Does everybody understand that? Please let me know that you do understand that. All right. If you do, we continue to move forward. So that is all about the principles and the reason for our Constitution. The purpose and reason for our Constitution. All right. What was the purpose for the Constitution of us or the Plantagenet Crown? Okay. That was called the Constitution of Clarendon. The Constitution of Clarendon was a set of legislative procedures passed by Henry II of England in 1164, and he also established the Assize Court in 1164 based upon the Constitution of Clarendon in 1166. This is where your establishment clause come from the Constitution, religious freedom. All right, it originated from what we call the Constitution of Clarendon. Then the Bill of Rights came into effect of 1689, which was created by the House of Stuart. All right. So the Constitution of Clarendon was a set of legislative procedure passed by Henry II of England, son of Godfrey V Caliban, son of folk who love Jerusalem. So this is our Constitution that we go back, and these are further constitutions going back to us, going back to the time of when the government was called Witten. All right. We're going to qualify it in 1 second. The Constitution of Clarendon was a set of legislative procedures passed by Henry II of England in 1164. The Constitution was composed of 16 articles and represents an attempt to restrict ecclesiastical privileges and curb the power of the church courts and the extent of the papal authority in England. and the anarchic conditions of Henry II's predecessor, Stefan, the church had extended its jurisdiction by taking advantage of the weakness of the royal authority. The Constitution was claimed to restore the law as it was observed during the reign of Henry I, son of William the Conqueror, the first English freedom king. Prior to that, all the kings that were there prior to Henry I and William the Conqueror, his father, when they invaded England, were called Anglo-Saxon Berbers. How do we know it? Let's go to the 1911 encyclopedia. Dr. R.G. Latham, an ethnologist and a philologist, stated that all that is not Arabic in the Kingdom of Morocco, all that is not Arabic in the French province of Algeria, and all that is not Arabic in Tunis, Tripoli, and Fezzan is Berber. The explanation lies in the profound distinction of their character. The Arab is a herdsman and a nomad. The Berber is an agriculturist and a townsman. The Arab has built his social structure on the Quran, which inculcates absolutism, aristocracy, theocracy. The Berbers, despite his nominal Mohammedanism, is a democratic with the Jimna or Witamant, which is the government, i.e., which is called Kure Regis when William the Conqueror invaded, and now it's called the King's Council or the King and his or the King's Bench, one and the same. All right, and we know that it says that the Democratic was his Jimna Witamata in the Kanun or unwritten code called the Magna Carta of the individual liberties as opposed to the community's good. So as we can see, there was an unwritten code that was based upon legislature passed by those kings of England, going all the way from the kings of Wessex to the Plantagenet crown, which apparently was ran by family members, all right, the same kindred, and they were all Anglo-Saxon Berbers. All right, we know that when the English Breakdown Year was created, it was created by William the Conqueror, and he was of Frankish descent. We know that Franks were akin to the Visigoths and the Lombardies, which are all descendants of the Salian Franks, which were all descendants of the Northmen, where Thor, Odin, Loki, and Hemsdale, all these were deities named after evolutionary cellular organisms that originated as a result of what we call horizontal gene transfer. I talked about that in my last class. I ain't got time to go through it today. So therefore, if you haven't comprehended those terms, please go back and watch that video. So we validating that the Constitution or the unwritten Constitution of the Anglo-Saxon Berbers was the uncoded Magna Carta, and that was the laws created by the government called Witten, which apparently, according to the 1911 encyclopedia, had nothing to do with Anglo-Saxon Berbers. But I mean Anglo-Saxons. Everybody's trying to identify with the Anglo-Saxons, but Anglo-Saxon was just a bunch of tribes out there together. But the tribes were distinguished by their culture. Okay, their culture. We see our culture as described as Berbers who are dark skinned from Libya, i.e., Ethiopians, and we know that these are not nomadic Berbers. We see that they got a government and laws that were there that were unwritten, uncoded because it was the way of the people. All right, it was called the common law. I hope you all comprehend that. Let's move further. Constitution of the United Kingdom, qualifying it. The Constitution of the United Kingdom comprises of the written and unwritten arrangements that establish the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland as a political body. So that's England, Ireland, and Scotland, which is that originated to the Treaty of Union of 1707. But all of those kings who were sitting on Ireland and Scottish throne were operating under the English crown, not the Scottish crown, not the Irish crown, but the English crown. It says United States Supreme Court recognizes a number of constitutional principles, including parliamentary sovereignty, the rule of law, democracy, and upholding of international law. Okay? It also recognizes that some acts of parliament have special constitutional status. This includes the Magna Carta, which is 1215, requires that the king to call a common council called the Parliament, i.e., king and his council, to represent the people, to hold courts in a fixed place, to guarantee the fair trials, to guarantee free movement of the people, to free the church from the state. Did you hear that? To free the church from the state, to guarantee rights of the common people to use the land. All this was taken away after the Glorious Revolution, the Bill of Rights of 1688, the Claim of Right of 1689. All this took away that which was created by the Clarendon Constitution, which was to preserve this our estate as a result of the civil breakdown in government, which originated when William the Conqueror and his descendants, which were Northmen, Frankish, or barbarians, invaded the land. And when I talk about land, I'm talking about right here, over here. How I know that? Let's go back. And the topic is the Constitution. All right? The topic is the Constitution, why it became written down. What's the purpose of intent for them creating a Constitution and had it written down? All right? We know that the Constitution, it also mentioned that if something that's ambiguous about that Constitution or the laws that govern the Constitution, govern those who are governed under the Constitution, such as the departments and their employees, the only way that remedy can come forward is by way of what we call a writ, which is what we call a writ of quo warranto. So let's review quo warranto. All right, because we talked about in that my last lesson, we're going to talk about in this lesson in regard to the Constitution and why it was written down versus those that were not written down. Okay, Queen, take your time. In English American common law, quo warranto, medieval Latin, means by what warrant. It is prerogative writ issued by a court which orders someone to show what authority they have for exercising some right, power, or franchise they claim to hold. The writ of quo warranto still exists in the United States, although it is uncommon, but it has been abolished in England and Wales. Quo warranto is also used with a slightly different effect in the Philippines. So they no longer use England quo warrantos in what they call Great Britain or what they call United Kingdom, which Wales is a part of that territory, because England is now over here because the government was opt out and switched over here based upon it being the tenant court. All right. We must understand that. That's why it's not an effect over there, but it's an effect over here in North America, what they call the United States. The early history of the quo warranto. With the spread of royal justice in the 12th and 13th century, private franchise and liberties were increasingly called upon to hold the king's peace, to act against malefactors and peace breakers, so that it may appear that you are a lover of peace. From 1218 onward, royal eries, or what we call Privy Council for the Circuit Court, also began using old writs of quo warranto, a court order to show proof or authority, as for example, literally, by what warrant are you the sheriff, to investigate the origins of such franchise. An inquest of 1255 began examining such liberties nationwide, and the same inquiry was taken up again by King Edward I of England in 1278, when he decreed in the Statute of Gloucester that we must find out what is ours and due to us, and others what is theirs and due to them. Did you hear that? That's the whole purpose of the court system that we have here. That's the whole purpose of the Constitution of Clarendon, which is where your Constitution derived its enactments from, based upon the First Amendment as well as the Establishment Clause. All right, all those originated from the kings and queens of the plantation and crown, and majority is of the former. Okay, very important for you to understand that. So the quo warranto was an act created by Edward I, who was the son of Henry III, who was the son of Henry II, the son of Godfrey, the fifth kind of man Jew, son of Folk, ruler of Jerusalem. How do I know that? All right. Once again, let's read. Queen of Pretorius. Queen of Pretorius. Queen of Pretorius is a statute passed by the Parliament of England in 1290 during the reign of Edward I that prevent tenants from alienating their lands to others by substitution. Instead, require all tenants who wish to alienate their land to do so by substitution. The statute alone, with its companion status quo warranto, also passed in 1290, was intended to remedy the land ownership disputes and consequent financial difficulties that have resulted from the decline of traditional feudal system in England during the time of the Middle Ages. Did you hear that? All right. The name of Queen Pretorius derived from the first two words of the statute, and is original medieval Latin, which can be translated as because of the buyer. Its long title is a statute of our Lord the King concerning the selling and the buying of land. It is also cited as the Statute of Westminster III, one of many English and British statutes with that title, i.e., this is the uncoded constitution passed by our ancestors. Why is this important, everyone? Why is it important? Let's see. By the mid 15th century, the major nobility were able to assemble estates, sums of money, and private armies on retainers through post Queen Victoria's land management practices and direct sales of land. It is thought by historians such as Charles Plummer that this then developed into one of the possible underlying causes of the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses was between the houses, cadet branches of the Yorks and the Lancasters, cadet branches of the Plantagenet crown, started by Henry III, which was the son of Henry II, which started the Plantagenet crown, Angevin crown, which was started by John, which was started by descended from Henry II, his father, of the Plantagenet crown. Okay, so from these conflicts, we see the War of Roses that originated before we get to what we call the 100 Year War, which be the topic we talk about today. All right, very important that you understand that. So since we made that connection about Queen Pretorius and the Quo Warranto, the order to show cause, in regards to uh, violations of the authority that gives one authority to do what they do, and the ability to act like they act, which we call the Constitution, i.e., their charter. All right, and you either got your charter from only two places, either from the king or the one the king put in place. All right. So if you understand that, then we can move further on with this lesson. Right. Stanford Law Review. Why the Constitution was written down. This is from scholars. All right. Nikolai Boyd. Abstract. A funny thing about the United States Constitution is that it is written down. Words might seem like an obvious feature of any constitution, but they're notably missing from much of the Constitution of Great Britain. Why? Because the Great Britain Constitution is not written down, okay, into a single document. I know that, Brother Burgers. I know you still follow along. The object is, can you comprehend when you follow along? Okay. Or can you remember what is you comprehending when you follow along? If you can't do the latter, then it means you need to do a little bit more focusing on what it is that you're trying to attain. Okay. I know you're still there, my brother. So it's an abstract. A funny thing about the United States Constitution is that it is written down. Words might seem like an obvious feature of any constitution, but they're notably missing from much of the Constitution of Great Britain, the country from which the United States seceded. Historians have often assumed that the quirky American practice of putting constitution into a single document has its origin in the corporate charters of the 17th century trading companies that founded more than half of the 13 original states. But historian Mary Sarah Builder has written, it is surprisingly difficult to explain the change from corporate charters to modern constitutions with precision and persuasive power. Okay? This article attempts to do just that, telling the story of a series of lawsuits that forced the Massachusetts Bay Company to treat its charter term as a gospel. All right, relying on original research of thousands of primary sources from the United States and United Kingdom, spanning from 1607 through 1793. This article presents an account of how a corporate charter evolved into a charter constitution in America, while the British Constitution remained intangible. You hear that? I didn't write this. It said the British Constitution remained intangible, and the British Constitution is only based upon the legislation created by the British monarch. But all those laws created by the British monarch are null and void if they're not uniform with the laws passed by the English monarch or the English Parliament by the English Crown. Very different body politics we're talking about here. We must understand that. All right, those that we're talking about here dealing with the Massachusetts Bay Company or the Massachusetts Bay Colony or what we call the Plymouth Rock Colony or what we call the Provisional Council of Massachusetts, all dealing with laws governed by a constitution created by what we call uh, uh, the states, United States government. All right, for what we call the Massachusetts Colony under their Provisional Council, under their members, their officers. All right, it's very important you understand what's going on. That's what I always say, right, Bo? The article demonstrates that the written word became a defining feature of American constitutionalism a century before the American Revolution, and that this distinction between the American and British understanding of constitutions contributed to America's independence. The historical origin of American constitutionalism can also supply more depth to modern interpretive debates over whether text alone can provide meaningful limits on government power without reference to external traditions, modes of enforcement, or evolving practices. Okay? So now check this out where we go with this. All right, let's go to page 1408. Yes, Brother Burgess. Everybody try to retain what's being said. Why the Constitution was written down. Why the Constitution was written down. Or what constitute what was written down. Why the Constitution was written down or what constitute what was written down should be the question. All right. The article follows builders, builders in arguing that written constitutions are the product of a long American experience with similar documents. It adds new support to her argument that 17th century charter constitutionalism involved asking not only what written words meant, but also who had the power to interpret those words. Legal elites or the laity, what should be the consequence of violating these words, damnation or repentance, and most importantly, what was the relevant context that supplied meaning to those words. Ordinary meaning, unwritten traditions, legal arrangements, fundamental principles, or evolving practices, these questions remain just as relevant today as they did in the 1600s. This is we're talking about the semantics of words. Greetings, brother Garrell from the House of Garrell. All right, so the semantics of words. This article also shows for the first time that people in the 17th century Boston were already quite familiar with the constitutional government in the modern sense. They called them corporations. Okay, so the corporations that were created through the colonies that were established by the British monarchs under the authority of the English crown was nothing more than charters known as constitutions, which were the limitations of the powers for the corporation or the organizations known as proprietorships existed at that prior time. Okay? You must understand that. And as a result of them not acting under the social contract or the social compact by the Anglo alliances, whoever it is that made the compact with, it originated in what we call a lawsuit. Okay? The lawsuit. So the first lawsuit in regards to how does a court warrant to be issued upon those acting in the capacity to do what it is they're doing, but actually they don't have the power to do it, was actually originated in 1606 and 1654, dealing with those corporations that were established going back to New England, known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. All right? Very important you understand that because that's the root of the source of miscomprehension of who owns what. Okay? Who has authority to do what it is, because anything other than the permanent government is a temporary government known as provisional government, and known the provisionary government is what we had at the time of what we call the colony. All right? So the first lawsuit. When we read these articles, we read it and we don't even know who the parties are in the article. We just read past the names and just based upon look for what it is that we are looking for within the subject matter of the article, and not realizing the parties in the articles has an important part in the aspects of what the content you're looking for is detailing. All right. So it's very important that you make a cognitive as well as a decisive using mathematical proposition to come to your premises by way of your conclusion that you have drawn. Without those factual statements, which is the proposition, there's no premises. All right. Which you can go to all the channels on YouTube right now, and that's what you see. All right. So therefore, all the claims that you got based upon those conclusions, based upon your premises that you claim to be mathematical statements, are not based upon any factual provision based upon law or fact. And this is why you're in the result that you're in now. So our lawsuit, and we can prove it, why? Because this is real time. This is a real time action that we're talking about. This ain't play for us. All right? This is a petition for a court warrant and the state superior court of New Jersey, which is actually the Supreme Court, because all the power of the Supreme Court was transferred to the Superior Court, as we see in Billa versus Harris. Okay? So this is actually my court. These are actually my officers, and the jury are of my peers. All right? So therefore, as the king being sued his own court, the king is created by God. God creates the king, and the king is the one who creates the law. So you must understand that based upon my petition under Article 23 of the New Jersey Constitution of 1776, they have violated that social compact and that social agreement, and therefore a court warrant is warranted. Okay? So this is real time action. All right? But I'm taking this real time action back to the origin of where the action actually originated from. And that's going back to what we call the Mammoth Massachusetts Company. Okay? Very important. There's the complaint number. You see it right there. So this is not play. I repeat, this is not play. Let's go back to the article. The first lawsuit. I'm just picking off from where the original lawsuit came from, because the original lawsuit was for the Crown. The Crown started the first lawsuit, but we know that at the time of those monarchs ruling, there was no de jure monarch ruling at that time, because it was in the interregnum. So therefore, the corporation given or created by the charter given by those de facto king was not worried about what the crown was going to do, because they themselves was de facto. Okay. So they know that at one time that the jure king gonna come back, and everything that was de facto will be made corrected by that de jure king, by the de jure laws based upon, as they say, a court warrant. The order to show cause how it is that you got the authority to do what you do here on these lands. Okay? Very important. First lawsuit. The first lawsuit, 1606, 1654. The story of the litigation that produced a written constitution begins with a feud among a colorful cast. At issue were two overlapping corporate charters. One of the charters were owned by a knight named Fernando and a civilian whom just about everyone called Captain. The other was owned by a well-educated and well-connected group of religious fundamentals known as Puritans, i.e., the Pilgrims from the Plymouth colony, known as the Massachusetts colony, who procured it under suspicious circumstances and stole it away to North America. Did you hear that? The story of the litigation, once again, that produced a written constitution begins with a feud among a colorful cast. At issue were two overlapping corporate charters. One of the charters were owned by a knight named Fernando and a civilian who just about everyone called Captain. I think that's Captain Mason. The other was owned by a well-educated and well-connected group of religious fundamentalists known as the Puritans, who procured it under a suspicious circumstances and stole it away to North America. To understand how that charter evolved into a constitution, it is important to first understand the legal threat the knights and the captains posed to the Puritans. Okay? So we must understand who we're talking about. These two individuals were Sir Fernando Gorges and Captain John Mason. Okay, once again, Fernando Gorges and Captain John Mason. So who is this Fernando Gorges? Let's take a look at him. Because y'all read the article with it read right over. Singer Sir Fernando Gorges, 1565, 1568, was a naval and military commander and governor of the important port of Plymouth in England. He was involved in the Essex Rebellion against the Queen, Queen Elizabeth I, but escaped punishment by testifying against the main conspirators. His early involvement in English trade with settlement in North America, as well as his efforts in founding the province of Maine in 1622, earned him the title of the father of the English colonization in North America, even though Gorges himself never set foot in the New World. Once again, they called Sir Fernando Gorges the father of the not the English colonization because the English were not colonized; they were already here. Those who were colonizing what we call North America were those who were allowed to by what we call the Elizabeth religious settlement, which were those Puritans or those pilgrims from Plymouth Rock, okay, of the Plymouth colony. All right, very, very, very important for you to understand that. So let's just get a look at the origin of the family of Sir Fernando Gorges. All right, very important before we move forward. He was born in Clerkenwell, Middlesex, England. Ancestry, pardon self. Ancestry. Ancestry. Fernando Gorges was by blood in the male line a member of the Russell family of Kingston Russell, Dorset, and of Durham in Gloucestershire, an early member of which was Sir John Russell, died in 1224 AD, of Kingston Russell, a household knight of King John. King John and the younger King Henry III, to whom he also acted as steward. However, the last male of the ancient Anglo-Norman Gorges family, about two died childless, bequeathed his estate, including Wraxall, to Theobald Russell, a younger son of his sister Eleanor Russell, on condition that he should adopt the name of the arms of Gorges. Ferdinando was a descendant of the Theobald Russell Gorges. The Gorges family arrived in England with the Norman conquest. Did you hear that? The Gorges family arrived in England with the Norman conquest. The male line of the Gorges family died out in 1331 on the death of Ralph D. Gorges, the second Baron Gorges of the Knighton Isles of Wight. They were said to have lived in Somersetshire from the time of King Henry I and held their estate in Wraxall since the time of Edward II. The Gorges were the recipient of many royal appointments and privileges since Edward's time. Do you see the connection? Okay. So this Fernando Gorges participated in the overseas territory or the overseas conquest with the assistance of the House of Tudors by Elizabeth through what we call the Anglo and Spanish Wars. The Anglo and Spanish Wars. We must understand that. How we know that? Because Fernando Gorges participated in the Anglo and Spanish Wars. Military career. No documentary evidence records Gorges' activity before 1587 when he was around 20, but because that year he is referred to as a captain, it's probable that he took up the profession of arms several years before then, perhaps in his mid-teens, not uncommon in England at that time. It is likely that he was engaged in activity during shortly and after the outbreak of the Anglo and Spanish War in 1585. I just said that. You understand that? So Fernando Gorges, who are relatives to those who lived at the time of the Norman conquest, who came into England with the Norman under William the Conqueror, we see that he participated at the time of the Anglo-Spanish War. And we know that Anglos and Spanish are not the same people. They're not the same, gonna have the same culture, nor the same government. Hold that thought. So we see that he participated in the Anglo-Dutch War, and he was also kin to what they call the ancestry of Kingston Russell, all right, in Gloucestershire. That is very, very, very important. Why? Because what is Kingston Russell House? Kingston Russell House is a large mansion house and manor near Longbredy in Dorset, England, west of Dorchester. The present house dates from the late 17th century, but in 1730 was clad in a white Gregorian stone facade. The house was restored in 1913. At the same time, the garden was laid out. Here is the garden right here. The house is on the land which was granted to the Russell family previously, though not ancestors of Russell, Duke of Bedford, by an early king, probably John, King of England, reigned 1119 to 1216, and in the end of his reign, his son Henry III of England. So that means that Ferdinando of Gorges, who descendants goes back to the time of the Plantagenet crown, being that they were related to Russells. All right, it's very important. Why? Because the Russell family, all right, according to the hereditary, we're gonna see. Check it out. The Russell family. Kingsley Russell takes the second part of his name from the Russell family, who were granted manors for their service to the king. The manor was held in a chief from the king to grant sergeantry. The particular service performed for the king was originally a marshal of the buttery of the entry of Book of Fees dated 1211, recorded for the 100th IE County of Alderburgh. Okay, as you can see here, it says John Russell holds Kingston's for half a hide of land from Lord King from the time of William the Bastard, William the Conqueror, sometimes King of England through the sergeantry and being marshal of the King's buttery, store of wine barrels at Christmas and at Pentecost. Okay, it also states that here the sergeantry changed during the minority of King Henry III to the counting of the king's chessmen and storing them away after a game. John Russell of Kingston Russell was a household knight of King Richard I, where we get the term time immemorial from at the latest 1195, then also his brother King John, then of his infant son King Henry III. All these were sons of Henry II, son of Godfrey V, Count of Anjou, son of Fulk, ruler of Jerusalem. And they are related to Sir Maurice Russell. All right. And look at it says Sir Maurice Russell of Durham and Kingston Russell and first wife of Isabel Chedry, rubbing from Finery Brass of Durham Church. Note Russell and memorials in the small escutcheon and gable of canopy. Look at the features of this brother. Him and the sister are melanated. Okay? This is an illuminated manuscript of Maurice Russell. All right? And look at their characteristics. All right? Let me show you another picture. Albert's Church. The arms of Russell, Kingston, Russell are blazed at the top right on a chief three blazing. Look at this. Look at these faces. Look at their hands. Come on, all these were melanated ancestors of ours. Okay? Why is this important? Okay? Why is this important? Because when we go back into the Anglo and Spanish wars, we must understand the purpose of the Anglo and Spanish war. Okay? Because it said, if we go back to the article, it said that where we're at. I just seen Spanish war. Give me 1 second. Just saw Spanish war in here. Okay. So the story of the litigation that produced a written constitution begins with the feud among the colorful cast. At issue were two overlapping corporate charges. One of the charges were owned by a knight named Fernando and a civilian who just about everyone called Captain Mason. The other was owned by a well-educated group called the Puritans, who procured it under suspicious circumstances and stole it away to North America. So we already know who Fernando Gorge is, right? And let's see what his responsibility was. He was responsible for the charters governing Massachusetts Bay Company. Okay? Very, 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 very important. All right? Charter of Massachusetts. All right, since that was the topic in the court case. Massachusetts Bay Corporation or Company or Charter or Constitution. The charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company was an English world charter which formally incorporated the joint stock company for the colonization of Massachusetts Bay. The charter granted by Charles I of England in 1628 defined the regulations of the company, the land it will be granted, as well as the rights and privileges of the colonists. So that is based upon their citizenship. Okay, we must understand that if we're going to comprehend the history in regards to how we got into this mess. All right. So we see that The charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company was granted by Charles I, who was the de facto king of the Kingdom of England because he was a Scottish king. All right. And as a result of this charter, established what we call the Council for what we call New England. So let's go to the Council for New England. Let's get an idea of that. This is what you call doing your homework. The Council for New England was a 17th century English joint stock company to which James I of England awarded a royal charter with the purpose of expanding his realm over part of North America by establishing colonial settlement. The council was established in November of 1620 and was disbanded, although with no apparent changes in land titles. Did you hear that? There was no apparent change in the land title because all the land was intel belonging to the English kings and not the Scottish kings who were just overseeing it as a result of it being bound to Becketini and became vacant. Okay. In 1635. In Providence for the establishment of the Plymouth Colony, the province of New Hampshire, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, New Haven Colony, as well as the Providence of Maine. Did you hear that? Sir Ferdinand Gorges was a major promoter of the English colonization of New England and was a key figure in establishing the operations of that council. You hear that? So there we go again. We see Sir Ferdinand Gorges. All right. And we know that Sir Ferdinand Gorges descended down from the Norman king. We also know that he also took part in the Anglo-Spanish Wars at the time when the House of Tudors had overthrown the Plantagenet branches of the Yorks and Lancasters through the time of what we call the War of the Roses. And this is why this lawsuit is an ongoing lawsuit. And the only way that the lawsuit can come to a head is by what we call the prerogative writ of a de jure king called what? A quo warranto. And the only de jure king that can issue that quo warranto are those descendants from the Plantagenet crown. All right, those de jure descendants prior to the 100-Year War, which is the focal point. Prior to the 100-Year War, the second 100-Year War, there were two 100-Year Wars, the first 100-Year Wars and the second 100-Year War. We're not even talking about the second 100-Year War. We're talking about the first 100-Year War. All right, let's get into it. So we see that the Council for New England, as well as the corporation called the Charter of Massachusetts, which was a charter given by Charles II, goes back to the charter given by King James, Charles I's predecessor, and they were the ones who established the corporation known as the Plymouth Colony or the London Company, which were the same company. Okay, and the one who was headed of those companies were Sir Ferdinand Gorges. We must understand that. Don't believe me? Let's check it out. Plymouth Colony. The Plymouth Colony, officially known as the Virginia Company of Plymouth, was a company chartered, i.e., company, not a government, not the people, or government made by the people, but a corporation made by corporate agents. All right, we must understand that. Plymouth Company, officially known as the Virginia Company of Plymouth, was a company chartered by King James in 1606, along with the Virginia Company of London, with responsibility for colonizing the east coast of America between latitude 38 degrees and 45 degrees north. All right, you see it right here. The Plymouth Company was funded by wealthy investors from the Plymouth, Bristol, and Exeter, such as Sir John Popman and Sir Ferdinando Gorges. Competition between the two branches with overlapping territory was intended to motivate efficient settlement, but only the Virginia Company succeeded in establishing the permanent colony. This all goes back to what we call the Anglo and Spanish Wars of 1585 to 1604. Let's check it out, y'all. Follow the history. We're not even going to read the wars. We're just going to look at the belligerents in the war. Okay? Because we automatically know it's between the Anglo and the Spanish. Okay? The Anglo and the Spanish. So we know that the belligerents are the Anglo and the Spanish, and their alliances, but the commanders are what's important in regards to the alliances of the belligerents feudal components. All right? We see here on the English side, or what we see the Tudor side, which was we see Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I is the daughter of Henry the Eighth, the son of Henry VII, the one who seized the Lancaster branch by way of what we call the War of the Roses, because we know that the Lancaster branch was started by who? John Gaunt, the illegitimate son of Edward III, the son of Edward II, the son of Edward I, the son of who? Henry III. Okay? You must understand this timeline. So the Anglo-Spanish Wars that we're talking about in 1850, what was it? In 1585 to 1604, Sir Fernando Gorges was involved in it, right? And he was a supporter of the kings who were sitting on the English throne, such as those who seized the English power or the English crown under the authority of Henry VIII. Okay, we must understand this history. Okay, so we know that that was the Anglo-Spanish War of many Anglo-Spanish wars. Okay, so let's look at the Anglo-Spanish Wars to realize that this is not the only Spanish wars that took place in regard to the loss of state that we are now trying to recover. Okay, we must understand it. You're going to have to know this, brothers and sisters. If I know it, to come into these doors, you're going to have to know it. All right? So I took you from the 17th century, the early 17th, 16th century, in regards to a history that goes back to time immemorial. And we know time immemorial starts with the descendants of Richard I. And the rich sons of Richard I are the sons of Edward III, who was the brother of Richard I. All right? We must understand that. So we see that the Anglo-Spanish Wars of 1585 to 1604 was succeeded by other Anglo-Spanish Wars, 1625 to 1630, 1654 to 1660. What else? 1762 to 1763. Come on. 1796 to 1808. All these Spanish and Anglo-Spanish wars, where did they come from? How did they originate? Let's see. 100-Year War. The first war between Anglo and Spanish War. Why? Because Edward I was married to who? Eleanor of Castile, the daughter of Ferdinand III from the House of Castile, who were aligned with the House of Aragon on the House of Habsburg. Okay? You must understand this history. The 100-Year War was a conflict between the kingdoms of England and France. And this is the Spanish war. And France and England are in the picture. Okay? Why? Because Edward III, let me pull here. Edward III wife was Eleanor Province, if I'm not mistaken. I was wrong on that. But anyway, Edward III was from the Plantagenet crown. Okay? Edward I's wife was Eleanor Castile. I'm pretty sure about that. All right. Anyway, the 100-Year War was a conflict between the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of France in the Civil War in France during the late Middle Ages. These were succeeded by what we call the Capitan Plantagenet War. You see it right here up in the box? Capitan Plantagenet feud. Second 100-Year War. So you had the Capitan Plantagenet feud, which resulted in the War of the Roses, then resulted in the 100-Year War, then resulted to the second 100-Year War. You see the paper trail, everyone? You have to. If not, that means that you ain't seeing. All right? So in closing of the 100-Year War, before we move over back to the article, it said that the 100-Year War was a conflict between the Kingdom of England and France and a civil war in France during the late Middle Ages. It emerged from the feudal dispute over the dispute of Aquitaine and was triggered by a claim of the French throne made by Edward III of England. All right? It says right here. The term 100-Year Wars was adopted by later historians as a historiographical periodization to encompass dynastically related conflicts constructing the longest military conflict in European history. So these are historical facts, all right? The belligerents are the Kingdom of France or the Frankish kings which involved the House of Berlioz, and when we deal with the House of Berlioz, we get into New France here in North America. But we're dealing with the Kingdom of England, you have the Kingdom of France dealing with the House of Plantagenet. So how you got two ruling dynasties in France, one from the Kingdom of England, lined with the kingdom of the House of Plantagenet, and those who are aligned with the Frankish kings from the House of Berlioz. All right? Very important you understand that. And the Frankish were aligned with the Crown of Castile, which Eleanor Castile descended down from, who was married to Edward I, all right, son of Henry III. So you must understand this line. The war is commonly divided into three phases separated by truces: the Edwardian Wars, the Caroline Wars, the Lancastrian Wars. Each side drew many allies into the conflict, with English forces initially prevailing. However, the French forces under the House of Berlioz ultimately retained control over the Kingdom of France. The French-English monarchies thereafter remained separate, despite the monarchs of England, later Britain, established themselves as the sovereigns of France in 1802. Okay? So as we can see, we understand that the 100-Year War was the predecessor for the Anglo and Spanish Wars, which ended in which not didn't end it, but the one paramount one was that in the 16th century, which involved Sir Fernando Gorges, which involved the territory encompassing what we call the New World that you call here North America. And those territories you call North America was based upon territory, but that was already owned by England as a result of the conflict going back to the 100-Year War. All right? Going back to Edward I's descendants, and that's the reason why the Coromantel actually originated in the first place as a result of the land that was being taken as a result of the breakdown and the civil war and the government that was existed at the time of the Plantagenet crown. Everybody must understand these facts. So once again, back to the article. Let's go to 1421. Okay. The variances from the text of the charter wasn't all that unusual. In the East India Company, the City Alliance, and other corporations of the era, corporate directors referred their charters more often to verify all the goodies the crown had given them than to seek out restrictions on their own authority. Leaders like Winthrop certainly didn't interpret their charters with the textualist approach of modern judges. For example, in 1632, when someone asked Winthrop whether the charter or patent imposed any limitations on his authority, he answered no, stating that the patent making him a governor gave him whatever power belonging to a governor by common law or the statute. This originated in what we call a lawsuit, which calls for a court warrant or order to show cause. Let's see it. Now we already know where the court warrant originated from in the 12th century by Edward I. Now we see the same prerogative mentioned by the de facto kings under the Scottish monarchs when the charters were given to the Massachusetts Bay Company by Charles I in regards to dissolving that corporation and that charter as a result of not going by the original social compact. All right? You got to talk like this. You can't talk like this if you don't understand it. So the core warranto. The Massachusetts Bay Company had acted efficiently, receiving its charter in 1629 and establishing a diving government in New England by 1632. But later that year, as the Anglo-Spanish War drew to a close, you hear that? Sir Fernando Gorges and Captain John Mason returned to the council for New England. They were flabbergasted to learn that their fishing colony in Salem now claimed to be a corporation that owned land that had previously granted to themselves. From the perspective of Gorges and Mason, the Massachusetts Bay Corporation was a fraudulent enterprise. Did you hear that? To get this corporation dissolved, Gorges and Mason petitioned for the help from the King's Privy Council, the groups of lords and bishops who gave the king's advice and executed his order by way of it being under an interregnum. All right. The Privy Council agreed to examine how the patents for the said plantations have been granted and how carried. The Privy Council intervened Gorges and Mason's representative for the Massachusetts Bay Company, and witness from New England who reported that the Massachusetts Bay Company Board of Directors was established a punitive theocracy there. One witness reported that swarms of migrants were leaving Old England for New England. These migrant ships were full of Puritans and other descendants whom diverse persons known to be ill affected and discontented with the Church of England. A second witness claimed that he had been whipped, mutilated, fined, and banished for uttering malicious, scandalous speeches against the government in the Church of Salem. A third group had similar stories of being punished by a corporate government in which they had no vote because they weren't allowed to purchase shares. You guys hear this? Some of the investigating Privy councils were willing to forgive all these transgressions on the theory that it's better for New England to have a puritanical colony than no colony at all. But most feared that the imposterous days meeting in New England might try to take advantage of their distance from London and wholly shake off the royal jurisdiction jurisdiction of the sovereign magistrate. So in 1634, the council ordered that the Massachusetts Bay Company to send its charter back to London for review and possible dissolution. All right, based upon a coro warranto. Okay, which is what I'm doing. I showed you. I'm issuing a coro warranto for the dissolution of the corporation of the state of New Jersey. George and Mason were delighted by this turn of events. One of their allies boasted that the king has taken the matter into his own hands and would soon declare the charter to be void. But under English law at that time, voiding a corporate charter was not so simple even for the king. As mentioned above, when a king signed a corporate charter, he was issuing a written document granting a group of people special privileges to do things they couldn't ordinarily do without his permission. Did y'all hear this? Oh, come on. Do without his permission. All right, let's move a little further. Let's go to 1492. Bring home the meat. Yeah, just warm that up. Ain't there's a little more in there? 1492. Now we started on page 1408. All right, now we're going to page 1492. Thank you. 1492. Page 1492 in this article. 1490. Let's go to 1491. All right, let's go ahead. Pamphleters generally supported the Provincial Congress. We're talking about that of New England. All right, under the Massachusetts Bay Corporation or Company. Pamphleters generally supported the Provisional Congress attempt to continue the charter's government extra legally, just as their ancestors had done a century earlier. Joshua Quincy Jr., for example, compared the situation to when the allies of Edmund Andrews overthrew the charter in 1686. He described how from the day of Gorges, and we talk about in Mason and Randolph and Cranfield, down to the present day, a undiminished race of villains has sought to make void the charter of our liberty. And it was up to the Provisional Congress to fight back. And an anonymous author agreed that the charter to us granted by King William III and Queen Mary was valid and sacred. As the Magna Carta granted by King John, he implored the provincial leaders to preserve their constitution sacred and entire. So that means it wasn't the same as the Magna Carta, but it had to him it had the same effect as the Magna Carta. All right, but we know that was temporary until the lawful Magna Carta was restored based upon the unwritten or the uncoded laws of the Magna Carta, which we know based upon the 1911 Encyclopedia was that of the government established by the Berbers, and that the government created by that of the United States through their written constitution. Okay? Very, 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 very important. The first written constitution. While this debate raged through the winter of 1774 and 1775, Thomas Gay remained in Boston and the Provincial Congress assembled in nearby Concord and Cambridge. As tensions increased, the Congress resolved that it was necessary for this colony to make preparation for security and defense by raising and establishing an army. Okay, so they were planning on rebelling. Their words provided prophetic for on the night of April 18, 1775, 86 years to the day after the 1689 Boston Co-op or coup d'etat. Gage ordered British soldiers to march on Concord to arrest the Congress leadership. The American War for Independence began the following morning with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The Provincial Congress soon resembled in Watertown and began overseeing that which would become a year-long siege at the British forces garrison in Boston. A few weeks later, the president of the Provincial Congress, Joseph Warren, wrote a letter to the delegates of the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia requesting the direction and assistance of your respective full assembly. Warren was in something of a rush. In 1691, Charter set out the last Wednesday in the month of May at the date for the governors to call for a new assembly, but the Provincial Congress thought that a new plan was needed because Gages had utterly disqualified himself to serve this colony as a governor. Accordingly, Warren asked the Philadelphia delegates for the most expensive advice respecting the taking up and exercising the power of the civil government, which we think absolutely necessary for the salvation of our country. Okay, so they plan on and predetermined that they was going to break away by creating their own constitution with their own parameters, their own laws, subject to that which was already the parameters or the laws governing at that point in time that was definite, governing indefinite and from time immemorial. Okay, let's go a little further in this article. Let's see. Start right here. On July 4th, 1776, members of the Continental Congress, this includes New Jersey as well, all right? On July 4th, 1776, members of the Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence, which accused the Crown of taking away our charter, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the form of our government. Once again, on July 4th, 1776, members of the Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence, not no constitution. They signed a Declaration of Independence to null and void the uncoded constitution that was already in place. As a result, it did not predetermine their rights as they wanted to based upon their newfound freedom. Okay? So July 4th, 1776, the members of that Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence, which accused the Crown, all right, not the Crown of England, but the Crown of Britain, which was composed of the monarchs of Ireland and Scotland and German and any other allegiance that they had that was governed by kings, all right? But none of them had anything to do with the kings of England, which according to the 1911 encyclopedia were Anglo-Saxon Berbers, okay? Anglo-Saxon Berbers. And we know that Anglo-Saxon Berbers are those who are melanated, as we've seen going back to what was his name, Kingston Russell, or what's his name, Marcel Russell. All right, and all of them were knights of the Plantagenet kings. All right. So once again, I repeat in this article. On July 4th, 1776, members of the Continental Congress signed a Declaration of Independence which accused the Crown, didn't prove that the Crown, only accused that the Crown of taking away our charters and abolishing our most valuable laws and altering fundamentally the form of our government. Within 9 months, the legislators of Delaware, Georgia, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Virginia had enacted or proclaimed versions of Adams' advice with documents they call the Constitution of, or form of a government. Did you hear that, y'all? The Charter of the Colony, the Declaration of Rights, or simply the Constitution of the States. As Thomas Paine anonymously wrote during the Pennsylvania deliberation, all constitutions should be contained in some written charter, one drawn up and framed by the people. By April 20th, 1777, every colony that had declared independence had adopted a written document to serve as its constitution. All of these written constitutions looked and functioned like the charter that preceded them. Indeed, the corporate colonies of Connecticut and Rhode Island simply continued the charters they had received in 1660, modifying them only so far as an adherence to the same will be consistent with the absolute independence from the Crown of Great Britain. This is what caused the lawsuit. All right? We must understand what's going on. We must understand the history that has taken place for us to find our way. Okay? For us to find our way. Let's see. So with that, let's go here. In closing, we understand that those that were subject to the companies that were created by Ferdinando Gorges and Captain Mason by way of the charters given by the Scottish monarchs as a result of their affiliation with the English or de facto English kings, Henry VII, Henry VIII, and Elizabeth I through the Anglo-Spanish War. And we know that those wars were preceded by the 100-Year War. And the 100-Year War was a war that originated as a result of the breakdown of the cadet branches of the Plantagenet houses, the Yorks and the Lancasters. All right. So it's very important that just how those who were under the auspices of the House of Tudors, they were all looking for or going through what they call a pilgrimage. All right. They were all going through a pilgrimage to find their way. Just like we are going through a pilgrimage to find our way. And to find your way, we'll be going to some place where where the way led to. All right. We know that when the Scottish, who were the Jews through the Scottish diaspora, when they left Jerusalem and because they were expelled, they made their way over to what they call Great Britain, and they became known as the Scottish people through their Scottish Enlightenment, and they started their diaspora over here to North America through their Enlightenment, which is what you have now. Okay, and this is what we call the pilgrimage. All right, and we know that the pilgrimage for their pilgrims were called the Plymouth Colony. All right, very important for you to understand that. Let's just look at that in closing. The Pilgrims, also known as the Pilgrim Fathers, were the English settlers, and that's a lie. They were not English settlers. They were those who were allowed to settle in English colonies by way of the monarchs who were sitting on the English crown, but acting in a de facto manner. Okay, and those Pilgrims were the ones who were accompanied by the Plymouth Colony and Plymouth, Massachusetts. All right, clear, cut, and precise. All right, and we understand that just like they were making the pilgrimage to find uh, 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 their home created by what God had promised us, we must do the same, okay? Because that's what a pilgrimage is all about. All right? Let's look at it. Pilgrimage. What is a pilgrimage? In closing, pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a journey to a holy place which can lead to a personal transformation after which the pilgrim returns to their daily life. Okay? So if you're making a pilgrimage to North America, then this better be your home. And if you're making pilgrimage to North America and this wasn't your home, guess what? You're in a world of trouble. We know that the pilgrimage made by those do the pilgrimage going back to the corporation established by the Scottish monarchs was a pilgrimage over here, okay, which they consider to be holy. Now, they didn't travel to Jerusalem, all right? They didn't go to Africa. They didn't go to Egypt. They didn't go to Jerusalem. They didn't go to Britain. They didn't go to Iberia Peninsula. They came over here to North America because it was such a holy place, but yet it was still called the Old World because Sir Fernando Gorges was doing his excavation on behalf of these de facto monarchs in place of what they call the New World, a world that had not been discovered. But apparently, when they was coming here, they said it was holy. I wonder how it got holy if it wasn't holy from the door. Come on, y'all better stop playing with us. All right? So in closing, we understand that pilgrimage is a journey to a holy place which can lead to personal transformation. This is why we're here, making our pilgrimage to find our ancestors so we can return to our daily way of life. Why? Because we understand that our pilgrimage, based upon our ancestors through the time of Crusades, go all the way back to Jerusalem over there in what we call North Africa, or what they call West Africa. All right. So we call that Seawolf. Okay. And closer. Seawolf. Late Old English pronunciation was probably the first English pilgrim to Jerusalem following its conquest of the First Crusade. His Latin written account of his pilgrimage tells an arduous and dangerous journey, and Seawolf's descriptive narrative provides scholars brief but significant insight into sea travels across the Mediterranean to the new kingdom of Jerusalem that was established soon after the end of the First Crusade. As you can see, these are cartography depictions of illustrated manuscripts of the Jerusalem. It looks similar to what they call the TNO map or the Mapamunda, all right, which we know deals with the three sons, Shem, Ham, or Japheth, or what we call Shem, Libya, and Japheth. We know Japheth is where Gomar comes from, where the Jews borrow their history from, all right? So you must understand that. So we see Seawolves as a name given for the first particular crusades to Jerusalem, all right? And our ancestors were making pilgrimages to Jerusalem all the way back in the 8th century from the kings of Wessex. How we know it? Let's prove it. Richard the Pilgrim. Richard the Pilgrim in closing. Richard the Pilgrim, or Richard of Wessex, was an English nobleman and Christian saint. He was a husband of Wuna of Wessex and the father of West Saxon saints Wilbald, Willenbald, and Walpurga. He led his family on the pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Did you hear that? To the Holy Land. Now look at the depiction of William, Saint Richard of Wessex, or Richard the Pilgrim. Look at those descendants. Look at their face, melanated, and they all got saints around their heads. Come on, y'all. They're leaving Britain and going over to Jerusalem for a pilgrimage. Okay? So they're leaving home to go to another home, which was one and the same, because that's what's their way of life. Okay? That was their way of life. It's very important for you to understand that if you're going to make your way home. Okay? All right? We understand that the pilgrimage that Richard made was the same pilgrimage that our ancestors made to a place called Jerusalem, which is not over there now, it's over here, based upon Seawolf's depiction, because it's based upon choreography of what we call Jerusalem, and I'll end my lesson on this. Choreographer. The choreography of Jerusalem. The choreography of Jerusalem is the creation, editing, processing, and printing of maps of Jerusalem from ancient time until the rise of modern surveying technique. Okay, so we have to go back into time to see ourselves and to see our territory which we govern. And if we go all the way down here at the time of the Crusades, you see that same map right there. You see it right there. Okay, so we see that Ferdinand Gorgas, Ferdinando Gorgas, as we can see, was from Kent to Kingston, Russell. As we can see from their escutcheons, as well as their coats of arms, they were melanated entities. We are melanated entities. All right. All the kings of Wessex were melanated entities because according to the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, they clearly said that the Berbers, in closing, and I read, Dr. R.G. Latham, who writes, once again, all that is not Arabic in the Kingdom of Morocco, all that is in Arabic in French province of Algeria, and all that is in Arabic in Tunis, Tripoli, and Fez is Berber. The explanation lies in the profound distinction of character. The Arab is a herdsman and nomad. The Berber is an agriculturist and townsman. The Arab has built its social structure on the Quran, which inculcates absolutism, aristocracy, theocracy, while the Berber, despite his knowledge of Mohammedanism, is a democratic with the Jimna Wittama and his Qanun, the unwritten code called the Magna Carta. So if it's the Magna Carta, then this is our Constitution, the unwritten code that was used before they decided to write down their code or their charter or their constitution to preserve their provisionary or temporary government until the world power was restored by I, the King of England, the center of the Plantagenet crown, through Godfrey, the fifth Count of Anjou, son of Folk, ruler of Jerusalem. And this is why I showed you our petition. All right. That's right before the court as we speak, based upon our uncoded laws, i.e., statutes, legislator, constitutions, i.e., charters. Okay? It's right here. Our authority to file our core warranto, order to show cause why all the corporations or organizations that exist today here in what we call North America should be dissolved. Okay? The same argument, the same lawsuit based upon the term core warranto that was done to the Plymouth colony on behalf of the English crown, which Sir Ferdinando Gorges served under as a knight. That authority we now have. So if you are a member of the Third Timothy Church of England, take your place as a knight and help fight this crusade that we will restore our holy place, i.e., our holy land, which happens to be here in what we call the Anglosphere here in North America today. And with that, I greeted you as I meted you, and as always, my brothers and sisters, in peace and love. Make sure you pass this on to all those platforms, Sarnetta TV, House Awakening the Minds, Know the Ledge, Samurai Student SETI, Sinetta Studios, Know the Ledge. Anyone who has a ability to be able to get in touch with those brothers and sisters, you need to inform them now because this is the only way they can be predetermine their salvation because this salvation will not be random. With that, I say